Hello, beautiful souls. You're listening to the Angels and Awakening podcast. I'm your host and author, Julie Jancis. Did you know that you can listen to this show everywhere podcasts are found? It's true. Now, I have 3 free gifts just for you. First gift, I give away a new reading each week to a person who's left a 5-star positive review of this show, then submitted it to me using the contact form at theangelmedium.com/contact. I hope I'm calling your number next. Second gift, if you'd like a new daily angel message, join me on Insta at Angel Podcast. Third free gift, if you'd like to know the name of one of your guardian angels so that you can work with them even more closely, go to the homepage of my website, theangelmedium.com, and submit your contact info at the very top. I'll email you back personally with the name of one of your angels. Okay, as we begin the show, I want you to feel the presence of your angels surrounding you. And just know that the loving, positive messages you resonate with today are messages for you from your angels and loved ones on the other side. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Angels and Awakening podcast. I'm your host and author, Julie Jancis. And friends, today we have an angel story from author Annie Orenstein. She's the author of the new book. It's called Always a Sibling, The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief, a practical, compassionate guide to sibling loss with research, stories, and strategies from someone who's been here. Oh, Annie, just reading the title, it touches my heart. Thank you so much for being you, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So on the podcast, of course, love that you're here. On the podcast, what we do is we often share angel stories where we know that our loved ones, they've crossed over, but they are still here with us today. Can you explain a little bit about your brother's passing and any angel stories that you've gotten, signs from him?
Yes, absolutely. So my brother, he's my oldest brother. I have two older brothers. He's the eldest of us all. And he was in the reserves, the Army Reserves, and was called up on a stop-loss order to Afghanistan. It was his second deployment. And he was deployed in July of 2009. And on October 2nd of 2009, he was killed by a suicide bomber. And so it was just, I think, almost exactly 3 months into his deployment. And, I didn't see or feel or sense any signs for a very long time. I was very closed off to it. And it wasn't until almost 10 years after he died that a friend really convinced me to be open to the idea that there could be signs, there could be messages.
We have to stop here and backtrack. So why are you closed off for 10 years? And what could your friend have possibly said to open you up?
I just didn't believe that it was possible. I think his end was extremely violent. We were not allowed to open the coffin we were not, allowed to even try to identify the body or the remains. And so I think in my mind, he was shattered. He was destroyed. And I didn't really consider there being any other options. I think I'm a very logical person, and I'm also very much like, if I can't see it, I can't necessarily feel like it was true. which made his passing very difficult because I maintained that what if the army had made a mistake? We don't know if it's him in this coffin that was returned to us, right? How do we even know he's gone? And so I think there was a lot that I had to go through and I had to process before I could even imagine that there was any piece of him left. And I think I didn't grow up in a family that necessarily, I don't think it was necessarily like non-believers, but it just wasn't a thing. It wasn't really a thing that was ever kind of talked about. And so I just, there would be things that reminded me of him, of course, but I didn't think they were signs from him. I thought it was just, oh, that reminds me of my brother. In hindsight, I think they were. Now I think they were. There's, I talk about in my book this movie, The Man with Two Brains, starring Steve Martin, where his wife has died and he's staring at her portrait on the wall. And he's like, if you'll please send me a sign, any kind of sign, I'll be here. And the portrait starts spinning and the lights are flickering. And suddenly there's wind in this room where there are no windows open, and his hair is blowing all around and things are falling off the wall. And finally everything, and you hear her voice, right? Like talking to him. And finally everything calms down and he's disheveled and the painting is off center and everything. And he just looks up and says, any sign, I'll be here. I'll be waiting. And like, that was me, I think in a lot of ways, my brother was like doing all of those things. And I was just like, okay, let me know if you want to talk, and he's like bashing me over the head with it. So eventually I couldn't really deny it anymore. But I have a very good friend who believes very strongly in all of this and also lost a brother. And she kind of said, like, there's no harm in trying and thinking about it and opening yourself up to it. And I was like, I don't even know how I would do it. I don't know what I would do. And she said, well, just ask for a sign. And it can be simple. You can ask for, show you blue flowers. And I was like, okay. So I did it, begrudgingly. And the next day I'm walking to work, or maybe a few days later, and I saw some blue flowers. And I thought, well, that's just the power of suggestion. They were probably always there. And I just didn't notice it until I started looking for blue flowers. This is not a sign. And then a few days later, I went to see my psychiatrist, who is this older woman from Queens with like a thick New York accent. And I walk in and I'm not joking. She was wearing like Doc Marten style combat boots with blue flowers embroidered on them, a shirt with blue flowers all over it. And I just took one look at her and started laughing. And I was like, okay, I got it. I understand, and that was my like Steve Martin spinning portrait moment where I was like, okay, if this like 75-year-old woman is wearing these boots, like, okay, you've gotten through.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And it is. I mean, sometimes it's subtle, but it strikes you and it's profound and it's deep all at the same time. As we're recording this, I just had a friend and coworker, a woman on my team, Cheryl Harris, who passed away last week. And it's thank you. We've had it's just been a really, really tough week. You just when you're in grief, you just feel like you're under 30 feet of water and your body just feels completely different. But she used to always use the saying that some of the other healers have been talking about where she would go, Julie, I'm your ride or die, and that's not like a saying that I use, but it's a saying that she used all the time. Julie, I'm here. And I really believe that I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that she was going to be here until she was 105. I wanted her to be around for forever. But we were just meeting for this TV show right before you and I hopped on here. And out of nowhere, one of the producers used that phrase. And I was like, okay, Cheryl's here, because the last conversation I had with her, she was like, I'm helping. I'm making sure this goes through from the other side. This show needs to be out there to just get hope out to everybody. And she's like, I'm helping. So for it to come through in there was just, oh my God, it just like melted my heart. And the producer didn't even know what they said, but here I'm just starting to cry.
Right, right. I mean, my therapist was like, "What's funny? Like, I don't understand." Like, sorry, you were just a conduit for that message.
Yes, yes. Um, so I gotta ask you this too, because your brother's saying that your mom's gotten a lot of angel stories, and I don't want you to like overstep if you don't want to share those, but there have been some bigger signs that he's brought through uh to the family.
That's so interesting. I don't know. She doesn't talk about that very often, but now I'm gonna ask her.
Okay. Yeah, I want you to. I want you to. Um, so I know that your book kind of goes through this, but you talk about the research of sibling loss, stories of sibling loss. Sibling loss, we've got over 600 episodes of this podcast. It's not something that comes up all the time. And there aren't a lot of resources out there for sibling loss. Talk to us about the research and what you found along the way.
Yeah. So when my brother died, I went looking for a book that would help me. And I have this very strong memory. I went to the Barnes and Noble in Union Square in New York City because it was the biggest bookstore I could think of. And I thought, well, it will be here. And I went to the grief section and there was nothing. There are books on losing parents and spouses and children and pets. But there was nothing about siblings. And I even looked in like the index of some of the books, maybe there's a chapter on siblings and there's nothing. And what I took away from that was, I guess I'm supposed to be fine. Right. If there's this huge industry publishing, right, this huge industry, and grief is clearly a big seller, everyone always needs grief books. And if there is nothing, no modern resource, it's talked about in memoirs and in some really exquisite memoirs, but there was nothing in the more practical side about it. And so my takeaway was, I'm being over dramatic. I guess I'm not supposed to be so upset. But I think I always kind of knew that wasn't true. Like, it was confusing to me because I thought, but of course I'm upset. This is the person who knows me better than anyone else. And, not only do our siblings know us so well, but they know why we are the way we are, right? They know why we do this weird thing or have this weird habit, right? Because our parents did it. Sometimes we don't even know why we did it, but our siblings know why we do it, right? He was 8 years older than me. He had a better memory of my childhood than I do.
Ready for a little getaway that completely resets your energy? We're hosting a live in-person spiritual retreat called A Whole New You. It's the weekend of October 4th in Oak Brook, Illinois. This spiritual retreat is all about your own personal healing and growth, reconnecting with yourself, learning to connect with your angels. And I'm going to talk about all new angels that I've never talked about anywhere before. And you're going to leave with more personal peace, purpose, clarity, and confidence than ever before. Learn more and see the itinerary at theangelmedium.com/retreat. That's theangelmedium.com/retreat. Links are in the show notes. And friend, I cannot wait to meet you and hug you in person.
And so while on the one hand, I felt like I was being told to get over it, on the other hand, I was like, but this is significant. And what I learned, so professionally, I'm a researcher and I work in tech, and I do qualitative research, and research was kind of the language I know how to speak. And it was a way that I could approach this topic, and that I could feel a little comfortable with. Like, I think I could kind of hide behind it a little bit when I needed to and lean on some of those other things. And I also knew that my experience in loss was very unique and that it wasn't going to resonate with everyone, but there is nothing else out there. And so I wanted people to see their stories reflected back. I wanted people, who struggled with addiction and mental health issues and prolonged illnesses to see their stories as well. And so I knew that I needed to get other voices and other people's stories in the book. And so that was really the primary research that I did through surveys and through in-depth interviews, was, being very mindful to ensure a range of perspectives, different ethnicities, different relationship types, people who didn't have good relationships with their siblings, older siblings, younger siblings, all of those things. But then I also wanted to know kind of what does the academic literature say, right? There's a lot of studies on grief and the impact of grief. And one of the most surprising things was there was very little. There are kind of a handful of studies on sibling loss, and they all end, kind of the recommendations or the summaries all say like it's an incredibly significant loss. It's a profound loss. It has long-term physical and mental health implications for the surviving sibling. And more studies need to be done because it's not researched enough. And that's kind of how they all end, is like, this is a big deal. We don't know more about it, and we should really know more about it, but we still don't know a lot about it. But it was very kind of universal that like, no, this has really significant outcomes for the survivors.
And what is that? Like, what does that look like? Physical implications, mental health implications?
Yeah, I mean, it everything from increased rates of depression and a more severe depression, more kind of deeper, more of a chance of things like complicated grief or prolonged grief disorder, delayed grief. There's 15 different commonly recognized forms of grief. And one of them is resilient grief, and that's where you can kind of move through it. And siblings are more likely to experience a lot of those more difficult forms of grief that come from their grief being diminished or ignored, or having to put their own grief aside to take care of their family. And so they often experience those different forms of grief that come later. Mm-hmm. But it can also, health issues like increased cortisol and everything that can lead to, along with, headaches, GI issues, a lost sense of taste and smell was like a possible outcome of grief and prolonged grief. A lot of PTSD, and so everything that comes with PTSD and nightmares and panics, and those are even a lot of those negative outcomes can be even stronger if that loss is experienced in adolescence. And there really is a belief that a lot of that comes from the grief being repressed. And, really repressing that grief in our body has these long-term health implications because of the hormones that are then surging and the cortisol levels that are surging. So it's, there are biological explanations for it and why it gets worse as it kind of suppressed like that. And so it's a nasty combination of social factors that lead to it being suppressed and then the outcome of that suppression.
Which is a fascinating take that we actually haven't looked at on this podcast. But I imagine that it crosses the lines not just of sibling loss, but of the mother who loses a child. There are physical implications, mental health implications, the person who loses their spouse. There has to be for everybody, but
Yes.
I can see with siblings how, sometimes for the first time in your life, when you're that impacted as a parent losing a child, oftentimes I could see where siblings would step in to support the parent and uphold the family at that time. That makes tons of sense.
And
What? Yeah.
and to that point, sibling loss is often referred to as a dual loss because, to your point, the parents are grieving and you do lose your parents in a way. Your parents are never the same as they were before because no one could ever be the same after losing a child as they were before. And so not only have you just lost your sibling, but in many ways you are witnessing the loss of your parents because they are not able to support you. If they were a parent who could support you before, which is not a given, but if they were, they're not going to be able to do it now.
Right.
And, if they were already struggling to be supportive of you before this, then they're definitely not going to be able to be supportive of you now. And you are kind of left picking up a lot of the pieces. And so there is an element of sibling loss that is that dual loss of losing not only your sibling, but in many ways losing a big part of your parent. A lot of people said things to me like, I never saw my mom smile. I have not seen my mom smile the way she used to since my sibling died. My parents don't laugh as much as they used to. And so that element of it is another loss that people are coping with.
Absolutely. You talked about the 15 different types of grief. Can we go through some of those briefly? Because I think it'd be really, really helpful for the audience to just hear. You mentioned complicated grief, delayed grief, resilient grief. Maybe could we go through each one just briefly?
Yes, absolutely. So resilient grief is kind of that grief that where you're able to move forward. There is continued momentum. There is forward progress. It's not a denial of the loss. You're not kind of masking it, but you are able to often make meaning or, find something out of it that keeps you going.
The special
And
needs community has really found that. There's studies on the special needs community, and also child loss, and that a lot of times it's upwards of, I want to say 80 to 90% of couples who end up getting divorced if they have a child with certain like medical complications or very heavy needs, or after child loss. And you often find that the couples go in two very different directions. One needs to find purpose and meaning out of it all, and the other one is just completely broken and shattered. And I feel like oftentimes in the stories that I've heard resents the person who finds the purpose and the meaning, and kind of not that they don't like it, but they want that person to kind of be with them in their grief, not understanding that really grief looks different to different people.
Mhm. And that, kind of the framing in the book, the reason that I explain these 15 types of grief is because grief is extremely unique. And people often don't understand that there are multiple types of grief. And so, you know, to your point, like that person who's a little more resentful might feel like the person who is, making meaning or taking action, like, are they're grieving wrong. They're doing something wrong in it, right? And the person who's finding meaning feels like the other person is doing something wrong. Um, and so part of why I explain all of this is because grief is so unique that if you're not grieving the same way your parents are, or your other siblings are, or even just the way you expected yourself to grieve, that's one more thing to be really hard on yourself about, right? And some of these types of grief, like complicated grief, or it's now known as prolonged grief disorder, that's like a real fixation on grief, and difficulty accepting the loss, this painful combination of bitterness, anger, yearning. And that really requires like professional help, right? If you're suffering from something like prolonged grief disorder, it's really important that you are working with a therapist. There's often PTSD involved. And so it's important to know, okay, there's no wrong way to grieve. But if I'm experiencing some of these, this isn't just like normal resilient grief. And I actually might need a little more help.
But there
Um,
are some people like, because we have this in my family, there are some people who like maybe not the bitterness. What is the anger part? Because some people get so angry and they're angry at you and they're going to take every last bit of it out on you and they're just going to continually verbally diarrhea of the mouth all over you and beat you down until you have no choice but to not communicate with that person because
mhm.
it's such horrible verbal harassment.
So first of all, I'm really sorry that
Yeah.
is in your family and in your life. Um, but it's interesting. So anger and the level of anger and the ferocity, for lack of a better word, of that anger was something that a lot of people talked about in my research that really surprised them. They were
Mm.
shocked by how angry they were. They were almost frightened by how angry they were. People who are like, I'm not an angry person. I did not know I could feel this emotion. I don't think that's what you're talking about, but I do
Yeah,
think anger is like a big thing that people don't necessarily expect or see coming. Um,
sure.
but maybe what you're talking about, and I should say I'm not a therapist,
Yeah.
so I'm not here to diagnose anyone, but there are two types. So there's something called distorted grief, where the grief really does change your behavior, which often leads to increased self destructive behavior, like this extreme reaction. And exaggerated grief is like grief on steroids, where there's disruptive behavior and there's often like substance abuse, things like abnormal fears. And it can lead to thoughts of suicide or self harm, or it can even lead to the emergence of a psychiatric disorder. So, when we talk about kind of long term implications of grief, this is one that can kind of trigger other psychiatric disorders. And it really does change the way a person acts and the way that a person treats other people, which obviously does not make it okay in any way. But I thought it was interesting because there was someone one of my interviews, um, his brother had been struggling with substance abuse and with alcohol, and uh, he was saying that after his brother died, he became an alcoholic and ended up in rehab. And I asked, if you saw this destroy your brother's life, why do you think you did it? And it was so interesting to me that someone, when they saw it happening, would take on the same kind of self-destructive behavior. And he described it, I'll never forget this. He described it as some sort of hellish empathy, where he just wanted to understand. He wanted to understand so badly that he found himself doing the exact same thing. And I think that, just an example of one way in which it can really, really change our behaviors and turn us into someone who we otherwise would not have been.
Wow, that's fascinating. I would have never guessed that, but that's really interesting and explains a lot. So we have resilient grief, prolonged grief disorder, disordered grief. What else?
I think another one that comes up a lot with siblings is delayed grief.
Yeah.
Because we put the delayed grief and disenfranchised grief, which are kind of different, and I'll go through them separately. But delayed grief is kind of like when you hit the snooze button on grief. And you find yourself years later feeling like this loss just happened. So there is kind of like, nothing, I'll deal with this. I have to help my parents right now. I have to help maybe my nieces and nephews. I have to do these other things. And so you just don't process it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't continue like that forever. And at some point it catches up with you. And then you have this delayed grief. And what I heard from some siblings was they would have this moment of reckoning where it would be 5, 6, 7 years after their loss, and their parents, they realized that their parents could talk about their sibling with a smile on their face. They could recount stories, they could talk about them openly, and the surviving sibling could not. The surviving sibling still couldn't say their name without crying. And it was often because they just never dealt with their own grief. They were very busy taking care of other people. And so they'd have this moment where they were like, oh, my parents have worked through something that I have not. And then there's disenfranchised grief, which is also very common with siblings, which is when the griever isn't validated in their grief. It's the experience of walking into Barnes and Noble and there is no sibling loss book. Their loss isn't validated, and this can happen. It happens very often to siblings. The best example, I think the kind of most like spot on example I can give is that pretty much every sibling I talk to had the same complaint, which is people don't ask how I'm doing. They ask how my parents are doing. No one calls to check on me. People call and say, how's your mom? How's your dad? How are your parents? But they don't ask about me. And that's an example of disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief can also happen often based on the cause of death. And this is a big reason why, I wanted to have so many other stories in the book, because the way my family was treated after my brother died was very different than what would have happened if he had died of, an overdose, or if he had, taken his life, or even an illness. But especially when a loss is more taboo, I'm doing air quotes for anyone listening, but when it is things having to do with mental health or substance abuse, then the whole family's grief can be disenfranchised. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about suicide. And so there's kind of victim blaming, right? And so they don't give the family the space to grieve. And so siblings in that position, it's kind of a double whammy where their grief is often disenfranchised or ignored altogether.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. There's so many different ways that I want to go. Spirit saying to tell you that when it comes to the delayed grief, we have a spiritual type support group in our membership. And after Cheryl passed, we promised her, or before she passed, we promised her that we would keep that going, and we are keeping that going. But we had so many people who would come in, and there's dozens of people that hop on that call monthly, but they all say, so many people, it's 10 years that this person has passed, but I feel like I'm just able to grieve it now. It's 5 years, it's 3 years, but I feel like I'm just able to grieve it now. Julie, am I able to come into this group? Absolutely,
Hmm.
because that's what it's there for. And you're not alone. We see that all the time. Um, Annie, your book is just so powerful. Your work is so powerful. I'm so appreciative of the person that you are. I'm wondering if before you share where everybody can find you, any advice to those who are skeptics, like the former Annie, on how signs might open them up if they allow themselves to see them?
Yeah. So I think the sh- the whole way the book is structured is with, without, and within. And with is really processing that sibling relationship and the value of the sibling relationship. And without is that acute grief. But within is how to regain a, a sense of their presence in your life and how to have a new relationship with them moving forward in whatever way that looks like. And I think for a lot of people that involves signs um and so I do kind of talk about like opening yourself up to it a lot, doing the blue flower exercise, right? And what it came down to for me, eh, so maybe this will help others, was I decided maybe it is pure coincidence. I will never know. But what I do know is that, when his favorite song comes on the radio, I often feel like I get signs usually through music. Um, and so the way I kind of landed on it is it doesn't really matter if it's from him or not. When these things happen, I remember him in a positive way. I remember the way he lived. I remember the way that he made me feel and the joy that he brought to my life. And I get a bit of that joy back. And maybe it's power of suggestion or placebo effect, but a placebo effect is still an effect. Like
Yeah.
placebo effect still can help with symptoms, can help with all of these things. And so I just kind of decided like it doesn't actually matter if it's
Mm.
real or not. What matters is that I have opened myself up to his presence continuing past his death. And in any way that I can still feel or sense that presence, it feels like a gift. And so I'm going to look for those opportunities and I'm not going to question it because it makes me feel good and it brings me joy. And that's enough.
I don't think you could have said that better. That was so beautiful. Annie, share the title of your book one more time where everybody can find you, the book. We'll put it all in the show notes below.
Awesome. The book is called Always a Sibling, The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief. It's available everywhere books are sold. And you can find me on Instagram at Annie Sklaver Orenstein.
Amazing. We're going to put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, Annie. And to everybody listening, if you have an angel story that you would like to share, we would absolutely love to have you on the show. Go over to theangelmedium.com, use the contact form, and submit your story. If you ever have trouble with that, you can always email us at julie@theangelmedium.com. Love you, friends. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you so much.
Friends, I need your help reaching as many people as possible. If you'd like to support this podcast and help us spread more hope to the world, please book a session with me, join my angel membership, or take my angel Reiki school. What's the difference? If you'd like to know what messages your angels and loved ones have for you, you'll want to book a session with me. The angel membership is all about your own personal spiritual healing. The membership takes you on a spiritual journey that teaches you how to create your own heaven on earth. And the Angel Reiki School is for those who want to get certified in mediumship, angel messages, and energy healing all at once. These are 3 ways you can help us share a message of hope and love with more people than ever before. Register for one or all 3 at theangelmedium.com. That's theangelmedium.com. Now, let's pray together. As we do, I want you to pray in a way where you feel as though everything you want for yourself and the world has already come true, and you're giving thanks. Why? Because this is the best way to manifest. So let's begin. God, universe, source, thank you. We're so grateful that you've blessed this world with calm and peace for all. This calm and peace has spread like ripples, soothing the hearts of every soul. Thank you for opening our hearts to abundance, allowing each of us to live our most authentic life, and helping us to create our own heaven on earth. We thank you for the love and deep heart-to-heart connection that surrounds us every day in our relationships. We thank you for the abundance of health and aliveness we feel radiating from every cell in our and our families' bodies. Thank you for the gift of walking this life with us and guiding us every step of the way through your messages. We hear you through our own intuition, and we feel you walking right by our sides, and we overflow with gratitude. Thank you for financial abundance, an abundance of opportunities and miracles, blessings, and prosperity in every way. We know that you want us to succeed so that we can show others how you want them to succeed too. Thank you for the boundless love, kindness, empathy, and compassion that binds us all together. Thank you for the laughter, fun, moments of pure delight that fill us every day, especially today. God, universe, source, thank you for blessing us beyond measure and allowing us to use our souls, gifts, talents, skills, and abilities to serve the world. We love you. I love you. And in this we pray. Amen. Friends, we're working on some pretty major things over here. And if you wouldn't mind saying a little prayer that these things come to fruition if they're God's will, we'd so appreciate it. And please add a little prayer in for any specific thing you need right now, too. Have a beautiful, blessed day. And don't forget to submit your contact info at theangelmedium.com if you'd like me to channel the name of one of your angels for you. Sending you peace, bliss, and many blessings.